You are listening to Be Amplified, the podcast with Bree and Thais, episode 42.
Hey Amplifiers, welcome to Be Amplified, the podcast. My name is Thais.
And I'm Bree Seeley. We are the co-founders of the Amplify Collective,
A movement aimed at radically disrupting how purpose-driven women connect and operate in the world.
because we believe it's not just what you do, but who you are that matters.
Each week, join us for messages and interviews that will leave you feeling amplified and ready to change the world.
Let's do this.
Hello!
Good morning, world.
It is Thais and Bree. We are in my closet. It is a good day. It's Monday. Spring is in the air. At least here in Los Angeles. Can't really say about anywhere else, but it feels good to be in the sunshine, in the breeze. And we have a really special podcast episode interview for you all with Natalie MacNeil. She got pretty vulnerable in her interview, and so we felt like we would be vulnerable too. And we're going to share a little bit about the process of kind of ending relationships.
Yeah, not a comfortable subject, and just something that we all face and we all deal with, but something that a lot of us will avoid for a really long time. So I'm excited to get chatting. But before we do that,
we have a mixer coming up tomorrow at Industrious in downtown LA. It's going to be so good. We have Le Grand Courtage. We have all the other things. It's going to be a really good night where you get to unnetwork with your other LA women. It's going to be super, super duper special.
The venue is beautiful. We love Industrious. And
the people that show up are just so epic. Just really cool women, like the women that you want to know. I was just talking to a friend who came to one of our events back when it first started, and she lives in England, and she was sharing how she's still connected with so many of the women that she met when she came to our event.
Yeah, that was like 18 months ago.
Yeah, and she lives in fucking England, and that's just so cool, the community that we're building and how the women really, really get to know each other and create relationships that are based on so much more than just what you do. So if you feel called, come join us. Go to our website, theamplifycollective.com, go to the events tab. You'll see all of our upcoming events, including the mixer tomorrow. We're really excited.
Yes. For those of you that don't know, we host about 4 to 5 events a month in Los Angeles. Most of them are for our members, but this mixer is one of our rare public events. So if you're interested in learning more about us, finding out our vibe, come join us tomorrow night and clink a little glass of champagne. And by little, I mean little, because I'm not really drinking anymore.
All right, so let's talk about ending relationships.
Whew.
Where do we even begin with this?
This is a tough one.
How about we start by sharing a story of when we ended a really painful relationship and what that experience was?
Yeah. When I was in college, I had, my best friend. We were inseparable. We did all the things together. We, met in Europe once when we were both living over there. Like we were so tight. And as the years went on after we left college and, just kind of our paths went in different directions. And it just started becoming really apparent that we weren't aligned anymore. And it was heartbreaking. It was really hard to face the fact that, we were choosing to live life in very, very, very different ways. And, after years and years and years of being inseparable, all of a sudden we would go months and months and months without talking. And even now, we haven't talked on the phone, I don't think, in probably 7 or 8 years. And it still breaks my heart. We never had a formal quote unquote breaking up. It was just
I think those are the hardest.
Yeah.
I think the hardest are the relationships where there was no clear end.
Yeah.
When I was in college, it was my final year of college. So it was the summer before my final year of college, and in my final year, I cultivated or developed or got mononucleosis. And mono, if any of you
The
have
kissing disease.
not had it, yeah, uh, it's awful. You just feel so tired. I mean, I was sleeping 18 hours a day, and still feeling so exhausted. I was sickly, weak. I couldn't eat, and I was in a relationship at the time, on and off, with a guy who it was a very passionate relationship. It was my first boyfriend, and that summer, we kept getting into these really big fights. And I think it's probably, I mean, on some level it was because of my mono. It was because I was sick. I wasn't able to handle life that well. I wasn't conscious yet, right? Like, I didn't know what was happening within me, and I was just, feeling a lot of distrust and anger towards myself, and it went out towards him. He also was far from perfect. And so we were getting into these huge fights and kind of pulling our friendships that we had cultivated through our relationship apart as well. And towards the end of the summer, I moved up to Boston, where I went to school a month before classes were supposed to start, because I had pretty much lost all of my friends in that kind of messy breakup, including two of my best friends. Um, and it was devastating, because I had assigned my entire identity on the friendships that I had. And so I lost two of my best friends. I lost my boyfriend that I thought I was going to, get married to. I lost all of the friends that I'd cultivated all through high school because of that. It was so awful. And it's what sparked my dark night of the soul. It's what sparked my kind of first awakening, and my relationship with God and universe and whatever. So I guess, all things are good, but in that moment, I just remember being so devastated, and then going on Facebook and seeing all of them partying together, be together, hang out together, and I wasn't invited, I wasn't included, no one was talking to me. A few years later, I actually reached out to one of the women that I was best friends with, and I sent her a Facebook message, basically, apologizing for my side, and I didn't have any desires for us to become best friends again, but I just was doing my part to kind of clear that slate, because that's the worst part, Brie. Like, there was no ending, there was no,
Yeah.
we're not going to be friends anymore. It was just, they just all disappeared. I have absolutely no doubt that I was labeled the crazy ex. Oh my gosh, the crazy woman. Like, she went ape shit. She went crazy. She's crazy. You know how all men designate their ex-boyfriends as crazy, and all women
Well,
designate their ex-boyfriends as assholes? Like,
at
I
that age, yes.
I was certainly labeled as crazy, and I have to take responsibility that there were some parts of what I did that was so not cool. But anyway, I reached out to her a few years later, and she completely dismissed me, and said again that she was not interested in opening conversation, and that devastated me again. So, it's just, we understand the pain, I guess is what we're trying to say,
Yeah,
about
and
ending relationships, and we know how painful it is.
yeah, and I think part of the reason that we kind of allow it to be so painful is because I feel like there's just this like unspoken understanding that like if you become friends with someone or if you're in a relationship with someone, there's always this like expectation of
Of forever.
forever.
What?
Jinx!
There really is,
There
though.
is, like, think about it, you have this expectation that things are never going to change, and I think it's really unhealthy. Thais and I have actually started having conversations. She called me up the other day and she's like, "I just want to warn you that maybe in like 5 to 8 years I'm going to have a baby, and that's going to change our relationship." And I've even had thoughts where I'm like, "Thais, when I meet my man, that's going to change our relationship." So we hold on to this idea that whatever the best days of our lives are going to continue, like our life is going to be the same, our
Well,
relationships are going to be the same for
we're
the
fed
rest of our
this,
life.
though. We're fed this. Look at Boy Meets World. Okay, first off, that was the best show ever. I
I'm
loved
really fascinated to see where you're going with this.
I love Boy Meets World. And their friendship
Oh.
remained friendships from the time that they were like, what, second grade to
To
beyond
college, yeah.
college. And now they have Girl Meets World or whatever, which
I
is
think it got canceled.
it's about their children, but all of them come back and they're all still friends and they're
And then their
all
kids
still
are friends, and
yes.
then, it's like
And but this isn't just a one show. This is what we're
yeah.
fed. We're fed this idea that you maintain the same relationships, and even though you change, you should never change too much to change the relationship.
Well, I think what we're fed is this idea that we shouldn't change fundamentally.
Exactly.
Like, the
Exactly.
little things outside of us can change, we can move across the neighborhood or whatever, but I think this idea is also based on this older fact that you just stay in your bubble. Like,
Yeah.
you don't even leave your hometown.
Yeah.
And you keep all the same friends, you do all the same things, you go to the same bars, you like all of this stuff. And for those of us that are living amplified lives, our story is so different.
Yeah.
Like, that is not our story, but we still fall into the trappings that all of our relationships have to stay with us. They have to be with us forever in the exact capacity that they were brought into our
Yeah.
lives.
I mean, I definitely have that in my heart where I look back into all the relationships that changed. And I'm like, why did it have to change? Like, it was so good. Like, why did I have to end all those relationships? Like, why did everything have to happen the way it did? And now, of course, looking back, I do understand why everything had to change. And all those relationships were no longer the relationships necessary in my life to take me to the next level. And it's kind of like the universe plucks people out of my life that's like no longer conducive to my success and my growth. And when we make space and remove the old, we invite in the new. We invite in new people that are going to take us to the next level. And so while on a rational level that's certainly something I understand, on a very emotional level it can feel so hard to say
Mm.
goodbye to childhood friendships, to say goodbye to boyfriends and partners that we feel define us and that we feel are going to be in our lives forever.
Well, and especially when there's like nothing wrong. Like, this was
Yes.
my story when I broke up with my ex 8 years ago. There was like nothing wrong. We were great. In fact, 2 weeks before I broke up with him, one of our friends were over and she was like, "The two of you have the perfect relationship.
Oh
Like,
geez.
I just love everything about you," and blah, 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 blah. And just now sitting here kind of digesting as Thais and I are talking, I think the relationships that I've outgrown have been exactly because of that, because I have gone through a massive shift in my personal development. And basically, these are people that weren't willing to ride the elevator up with me.
Yeah.
And that's part of why, when I broke up with my ex 8 years ago, it was definitely precipitated by me starting my spiritual journey. I had gotten into a car accident and started doing yoga and getting Reiki appointments and all these things to heal my physical body. And the side effect of that was that I started diving into my emotional body and my spirituality and all these things. And I remember he would say to me when I would go to these events, like, "Don't come home with any snake oil."
What does that
And
mean?
snake oil is like snake oil salesmen. They
Oh.
sell you like the shit. Like,
Oh.
it doesn't actually do anything,
Oh.
but they like sell it to you. It's kind of like our conversations about like crystals and stuff
Okay,
like that.
yes,
We
okay.
joke a lot about spiritual stuff because it is hilarious if you think about it. So he was not willing to be on that path of growth with me. And because of that, my fundamental being, my core of who I am was shifting, and they just weren't on the journey with me. They weren't committed to going where I see myself going.
It's interesting because my first relationship with my first boyfriend that lasted on and off 3 years, I he ended it with me, and I'm so fucking grateful that he did because I would probably still be trying to be in that relationship. And it's because we're so scared of the unknown. We're so scared of what if we're not lovable, and what if no one else wants us, and what if this is as good as it's going to get. And so we kind of stick around with these people that treat us like
Hmm.
shit. um he cheated on me multiple times, and I emotionally manipulated him, so neither one of us were healthy together. And yet I kept going back to him and I kept being like, no, let's just hang out one more time. Let's just be friends. Let's just hang out. And finally, he just stopped responding to me. And I haven't heard from him in a really, really long time. And I'm so fucking grateful that he had the willpower to stop talking to me because it forced me to be like, okay, it's time for me to move on. And I will only say, I will say too, it is hard when there isn't closure. It is hard when there's no that definitive, it's over, let's move on. The relationships where there was that definitive end, it's much easier to move on from.
But
Uh
not even necessarily. So I broke up with this guy 8 years ago, and then when I got ready to move to LA, so for only 4 years ago, he and I sat down and had lunch.
oh,
And we hadn't really talked in that 4 years. We still had a few mutual friends, and so we would still see each other periodically. We were still friends on Facebook, which, by the way, in the last year, he's unfriended me, which is really interesting. I'm like, you had to wait 7 years to unfriend me. Anyways, so we sat down, and it was so fascinating because he's like, I would have moved to LA for you.
wow.
And I was like, you hate LA.
Yeah.
And he was willing to stay in a relationship that was painful. Sorry, mom, for what I'm about to say, but like he and I hadn't had sex in like a year. And he was willing to stay in a relationship that wasn't satisfying, wasn't what he wanted, and was so incredibly painful just because he perceived it to be more painful to be alone
Yeah.
or be without me.
And so, that's there's nothing new here. I know so many relationships where people stay together for way too long because of that fear. And it's normal. It's normal
Hmm.
to want to be loved and to feel safe and to not um rock the boat. It's normal to want to stay in relationships that aren't supporting us because we're afraid of what else is there. My mom married my dad after I was born, and she admitted to me that there was a part of her that felt like, what if this is as good as it's gonna get? And she was 27 years old, which however 30 some years ago was getting older, and she was worried that she wasn't gonna meet anybody and that she wasn't gonna be in a family with anybody, and so she married my dad even though it wasn't 100% there. And they made it 5 years before that shit fell apart. And, it created a lot of turmoil in my life as a result. But then she met my stepdad, who they've been together for over 20 years. They're extremely happy. It's the most thriving, beautiful relationship I've ever seen. And I'm so grateful for him because of him, I live in America. And because of him, I was afforded opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten in Brazil. So
And because of him, she met me.
I mean, obviously. So things ended up working out, but it's so hard. It's so hard, and so one of the things that I've come to understand is that when you're ready, you're gonna know, and you're just
Hmm.
gonna do it, and it's just gonna be at that point. And don't judge yourself if it's 2 years too late, or you got into a relationship for bad reasons and now you have to get out, and that judgment of ourselves and that judgment of how could I have been so stupid to marry this person, or how could I have done that, or how could I have stayed there for so long, like it's not
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, it's not at all. So I'll share quickly just in case anyone's like, am I at a point where like, oh, what, that maybe you're not sure. So I'll share with you some of the warning signs for me that I knew that I was out of the country and I knew I had to come back and break up with my boyfriend. And one of them was like right before I was leaving the country, I was so depressed. And it wasn't like I was sad or suicidal or anything like that. Like when I get depressed or don't want to look at something or just want to check out, I was sleeping and I didn't have mono. I was sleeping probably like I would say 12 to 14 hours a day. I
Yeah.
would only be up to go to work and eat, and then I would go straight back to bed.
And
And I was so checked out and I was so numbed emotionally that I was unable to show up in my life. And that's when I finally sat down and was like, what is going on? Because this isn't me. I'm vibrant, I'm vivacious, all these things. Like, why am I just constantly sleeping, low energy, not wanting to show up and just completely out.
well, and for my previous relationship before I met Mark, the big indicator for me that something wasn't working was I was just crying all the time. and I had no reason to cry, in terms of there was nothing in my life that was obviously wrong. I had shelter. I was making money, very little money, and we didn't have a mattress. I was sleeping on the floor. So not a lot of money, but enough money to get by. And so there's nothing obviously wrong for why I would cry all night, almost every single night for months. And turns out it was because I was deeply unhappy, but I was so disconnected from how I was truly feeling because I was so scared to look at that. Because if I looked at it, then that meant I had to do something about it, right? That's why we numb out. That's why we don't look at our emotions, is because if we were to really look and we find out that it's telling us that we got to change and we got to change, that's just so radically uncomfortable.
Well, and
So yeah, so just notice, right, that low, like if you're in consistently low energy, consistently low mood, if you're feeling depressed, if you're tired all the time, if you're crying all the time, it's an indication that something in your life isn't working. It may not be your relationship, but something in your life
yeah.
isn't working. And then the next question is, what are you willing to do about it?
And I would say too, be careful who you talk to about it as well, because when I started I opened up to my best friend from college and said, God, things just don't feel like, I don't know what's going on. I don't feel like myself. I'm just feeling, these conflicting things, but I don't actually know. And I think that maybe it's because I'm supposed to leave him and, we're not having sex and all this stuff. We're not connecting, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, he's such a great guy. Like, you're really lucky. You should just stay with him.
Yeah.
And so I would just also invite you to, if you open up to people, talk to people that can see a different perspective instead of people that are going to encourage you to stay where you are just because it's there and because it's easy.
Yeah.
Now, is that saying that maybe you shouldn't work through the relationship you have? No, I mean, everyone's story is different, but make sure you're going to people whose advice or insights are going to be aligned with who you are in the world. And I was not the kind of person to sit around and be in mediocrity. I'm just not. And so for me to take advice from someone that might be choosing that for their life just wasn't the best thing. And so then I was like, well, fuck, am I crazy? Like, should I just stay with him? It was this whole process. And luckily, then very shortly after that, I left the country for 2 weeks.
So, and then in terms of, whether or not you're going to meet somebody else by breaking up with the person. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we stay in a relationship for as long as we do, is because we're so afraid of being alone and so afraid of being single and never meeting anyone better. Uh, when it comes to kind of looking at that question, um, one of the things that I've started to inherit as a belief back when I was healing from binge eating, and I had to overcome this idea of finishing my plate, right? Because a lot of parents are like, you have to finish your plate before you get out of dinner, and so I got indoctrinated that I had to finish my plate even though I was full. And so you kind of stop learning how to honor the needs of your body because you're stuffing your face because you have to. And so you start to not be able to trust yourself, right? So as I was moving beyond that belief of I have to finish my plate because it's wasteful to throw food away, starving children in Africa or whatever, I had to really start to ask myself, do I want to waste this food in my body or in the trash can? Because once you eat beyond your level of satiation, it's wasted food. Like, you're wasting it in your body. So would you want to waste that food in your temple, in this holy vessel that is your physical body? Or would you rather waste it in a trash can? And again, the answer is I would rather waste it in the trash can and not in my body. And so it's the same thing. It's like, do you want to risk being single and the possibility of something even better? Or do you want to waste your life being with someone that makes you unhappy? Take that risk, change that belief that being alone is terrifying. Being alone can be so liberating. There's no better time in my life when I traveled Europe by myself. I mean, it's just being alone can define you, can create a really radical ability to be with yourself. It's just so good. Like, stop being so afraid of being fucking alone.
So, just as a success story, I don't know if this
A
is
success story,
success, but I've been alone for 8 years, and here I am.
I don't know if that's a success
Here
story.
I am. But as proof that, like, one, you're not going to die. You can do it, and it's actually really fun. I've had a great time kind of getting to know myself and
Yeah.
getting to know who I am in the world and what do I want and what do I enjoy.
Yeah.
It's just there's no better time than to really get intimate with yourself. Intimacy ties and I talk about all the time.
So, do you want to waste your life being unhappy, or do you want to take that risk and believe that there's something better for you
Yeah.
out there? And it may take time, or it may take no time at all. But that moment when you make that decision, and we honor the scary part of it, but
Hmm.
it's just so worth it. It's so worth it. And if you make a mistake and that person was supposed to be the person or whatever, and you needed to be alone for a while to figure that out, then that's what
They'll
needs
come
to
back.
happen. And
Yeah.
they'll come back, or you'll come back, and you'll have the conversation, and you'll see what happens. But I've never regretted being alone. I've never regretted being alone. Um, and yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I have to
Awesome.
say on this subject.
Well, before we bring on Miss Natalie MacNeil, just a reminder to join us on our Facebook community. We have loads more conversations like this over there, and there will be an extended cut interview from Natalie over there
Yes.
as well, where we get even more juicy than the
It's
conversation
11
that
11.
is about
Make a
to come
wish.
up.
Make a wish. 11 11.
11:11. Okay, ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, done.
Okay,
Got
good.
mine.
Okay.
All right, amplifiers. So join our community, www.beamplified.community, and let's bring on Natalie. All right, amplifiers. We have one hell of a guest for you today. I'll introduce you to her quickly, Natalie MacNeil. So Natalie MacNeil started her business on accident. But she says it might be more accurate to say that she started the business because the universe gave her a nudge that was pretty hard to ignore. So, after a finding her purpose trip to Europe, she was trying to decide whether to start a business or get a real job. She was driving through the Czech Republic listening to a song called The World Is Mine, and at that moment, she happened to drive past a 2-story globe that read, The world is yours. So that is what revealed to her that she was ready to live life on her terms and build an existence and a career that filled her up. So since then, she has not looked back. What started as a personal blog about travel, inspiration, and finding your purpose has grown into an online space with tens of thousands of monthly readers, over 50,000 Facebook fans, 24,000 Twitter followers. She's written a book, hosted events and masterminds, and is basically just all around an amplified woman.
Wow, that's amazing. Welcome, Natalie, to our podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me today.
So we like to start our conversations off by asking our guests, what does it look like for you, Natalie, to live an amplified life?
For me, living an amplified life would be all about living in alignment. I'm not sure if you can amplify your message, your being, your business, whatever it is that you're creating in the world. I don't think that can be amplified without truly being in alignment. And for me, that means really trusting my intuition. Alignment for me means making the hard decisions, doing things that you know are the right things to do and your right next step, even though they're not always the easiest steps to take. And I've had a lot of those experiences, especially over the last year as I uprooted my entire life and my companies from Canada and moved them to the US. And that was a very difficult decision for me to make. I left a very long term relationship, and all of that was because of feeling very, very deep down like it was what I needed to do to fully be in alignment. So it's making those difficult decisions that allow you to just be so rooted in who you are. And I feel like it's from that place, it's from that rooting and from being deeply grounded into a power so much bigger than you that you can actually amplify and send all that energy up, and not just send it up, but send it out into the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I would love to dive just a little bit deeper into the topic of that relationship, if we may. How did you know, like, what was the greatest indicator for you that you knew that this relationship was no longer in alignment and that you had to make that difficult decision? Because I feel like oftentimes we don't even know, right, that we're not in alignment until we realize how out of alignment we are when we're in alignment. So I'm curious what that decision-making process looked like for you.
Yeah, do we have a few minutes
Oh,
here?
we have all the minutes.
Okay. So it was a very difficult decision because this was a person that I had been with for over 11 years. And, at the beginning, I think that we were growing together. There was one of the things that I look for in relationships, which is symbiosis. And I feel like there was a symbiosis in those early stages. And as my business started to grow and as I was experiencing so much and I was doing a lot of personal development work, I feel like it got to a point where I was on this path of growth that was probably at a level beyond the kind of growth that a lot of people will run toward because there's fear. People don't want to dive all in to anything, and I'm the type of person that dives all in. And I feel like for a while we just weren't growing at the same rate, and we ended up walking down different paths after quite a few years. And there were still some things that we were able to come together on, and we were still very close, and we had a good relationship. It felt like there was a big disconnect, and our paths kept diverging and diverging, and I didn't know how to make them converge again. And when I really felt into that, I, just examined what that would look like and what was there that was really beautiful that would be worth saving and worth trying to make work. And I looked at all the ways that maybe our paths could converge again, and I just couldn't find that common ground. And we had quite a few conversations that were very clear indicators to me that where I was thinking and where he was thinking, like where our minds were at, were quite different. And through a series of a few things, including knowing that I had to move to the US with my companies, that was a really big push off the ledge, I would say, because otherwise I probably could have stayed in something that felt very comfortable. And I think that in relationships, and I know I'm like going off on all these tangents, and
No, this is great.
this is really the first time I've dove into this with anyone or in any of my interviews. But I really feel that when you're in a relationship, there is this sense of comfort, and we do a lot of things in our lives to avoid pain. A lot of our behaviors are rooted in avoiding pain. And I knew as I felt into it that I was staying really to avoid pain, and not just to avoid my own pain, but to avoid causing pain to another person, because that's something that obviously we don't want to do. Most of us want to live our lives in a way that does not cause pain to somebody else. So I knew that it was going to be painful. And so staying was like an avoidance of that pain, and avoidance of, I think, pain being a distraction, because when you're ending a relationship like that and then unpacking it all and healing from it and looking at where you want to go next, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work for anybody. And when you're running companies and you're planning on moving and all of that, it's like, how much more can I handle? That's really where my mind was. But there was, in the last few days before making that final decision, it just became very, very clear, because I sat in stillness And I have a very deep meditation practice that is part of my daily life. And in that stillness, I sort of found all those answers that I needed. And I knew that, you know, to create what was next, there was this relationship that had to be burned away to make space in my life for something that would be more in alignment. So again, a lot of different thoughts there, and we could go off on a lot more tangents.
Yeah.
So if you have any more questions that you want to
So
dive into on that, but
yeah, so I was in a similar situation 8 years ago, like in this
Mhm.
long-term relationship that like wasn't painful enough to leave, but
Right.
it was too painful to stay.
Yeah.
So like, and same thing, like I don't want to deal with my hurt and I don't want to cause him hurt, but so what was there like a a moment or an actual thing that you were like, okay, this is my truth, like I have to end it? And how
Mm.
did you kind of then take that and move forward with it?
Yeah, so it's something that I had been thinking about quite a bit, and then toward the end, so in the final few days, like that's really when I made the decision. Once I made the decision, it was like, okay, I'm doing this now. And what happened was there's a little series of things that happened. So one of those things was that I had dinner with a group of entrepreneurial friends, and we were talking about relationships and entrepreneurs in relationships. And there was a relationship therapist there at the dinner, and we were talking about all these different dynamics. And it became very clear by the end of what was a, I don't know, 5 or 6 hour dinner that where I was in this relationship was no longer serving me. And really, at this point, it was all about fear of leaving and the uncertainty that came with that and the pain and hurting another person.
Mm.
The next day, I was giving a talk at a pretty big event, and I was on stage. And one of the questions I was asking the audience was around what their big leap was going to be. Like, what is that one thing that you're so afraid to do that you know that you have to do in order to get to the next level? And as I was saying these words on stage, I just knew that that had to be my next big leap. Like it was so clear to me as I was looking out at that audience. And then from there, I went home. So that this all happened like same day. And I was packing up a few more things as part of my move. And I had a box of books that I was packing up. And there was this book. It's called Brave Enough. And it's a Cheryl Strayed book. And I had got it about almost a full year before that, before the day, the day. Um, and in this book, I remember I had been in New York for my book launch, and I had opened up this book, and the first page of it was "Be brave enough to break your own heart." And I put my favorite bookmark in that page, and I was like, oh, don't think I'm ready for this book right now. So put this like beautiful gold feather bookmark in there and was like, I'm gonna come back to this one. And then things got really busy with work and the move and everything. And this book was on top of the pile of books that I was packing up. And I was like, oh, there's my gold feather bookmark. And I flipped open the page and it said, be brave enough to break your own heart. And it was in that moment that I was 100% sure what I had to do. It was like this little note that I had left for myself, like knowing that I was going to need it because it was my favorite bookmark. And I used it for every book, but in that case, I like put it in there and kept it in there. So it was right after that, like immediately um, that we had that discussion.
Wow,
And
that's amazing slash powerful
Yeah.
slash heartbreaking.
yeah, all of it. I
Yep.
mean, it was an emotional roller coaster. And at the same time, I was so relieved afterward because I had the courage to do it, because I had the courage to actually follow through with something that was just one of the most difficult decisions that I've made.
Thank you for sharing this with us, by the way. We never know what direction
No.
our interviews are going down, and the fact that you're willing to go here with us is, and since you haven't talked about this before, thank you, seriously.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for asking.
I do have one more question about
Yeah.
this, because I know there's a lot of listeners who are entertaining ideas of ending a relationship or of having the relationship go to the next level and not sure if they're ready. And I would just love to hear, now that you've kind of gone through that process, what is something that you wish somebody would have told you before going into the process?
I feel like I had this idea in my head of like, if this happens, I need probably like a 1 week vacation after. It has to be planned out. And I think I got really caught up on controlling the form of it and the timing. And I was like, if this is going to happen, I have to have these things in place. And the way that
Brian and I have no idea what you're talking about. This concept of control, we don't understand.
like, and I think, it came down to just surrendering to the moment and knowing that in that moment, it's what I had to do, even though I didn't know what was going to happen next. I still had stuff in our home in Canada, and we had this home together, and I just didn't know what was going to unfold, and I hadn't prepared for it, and that was okay. I think it was better that way. Some things you just have to surrender to. And I think advice for anybody who is considering ending a relationship is to really just sit in stillness with it and feel into it and feel into whether or not you think it can work, and communicate with that other person and see if your paths can converge. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't. Sometimes people just grow apart. And I would say that that's especially true, in my opinion, when you're with somebody at a very young age. And I feel like, having been with somebody since it was like my later teenage years, spending your 20s with the same person, I think that your 20s are just one of those decades where you change the most and the most dramatically. And I know that every single decade we're changing and we're growing and we're up leveling, but going from being a teenager and being more of a child and being dependent on other people to actually becoming an adult, I would say that we don't really become adults in our teenage years. I mean, maybe some people, but I really think that the 20s is that big transition period from being a child to being an independent adult. And so much happens during that time that I think those are some of the hardest relationships to save and to stay on the same page as somebody else, because you just change so much. So you have to look at what you want and what you want for your future and feel into whether or not that is aligned with this one person. And you've got to be able to find that common ground and have enough that feels in alignment, I think, in order to move forward with it. I want really deep love and passion, and I want to be in alignment with another person on such a deep level where it's a very sacred relationship. And I feel like, as individuals, we have our own things going on, and we're very strong individually, but we can come together to do for ourselves and also for the world and for the greater good, what neither of us would be able to do alone. That's what I want.
Thank you. Well, I want to shift gears.
Well, it's kind of like not shifting gears, right? It's kind of an alignment.
Well, it is a little bit because so Natalie made a post on Facebook yesterday, and I just happened across it this morning. And she talks about she went to shoot a campaign with this photographer that she shot with a year ago, and he said, "You're not the same person I met a year ago." And she asked, what was different. And he said, "The only way I can describe it is when you walked in here, your presence filled up the entire space." And Natalie responded and said, "I think I'm just me again, who I really am without all these layers." And so she referenced Alice in Wonderland.
Which is one of Bree's favorite things of all things.
Well, I just like it because Johnny Depp was in it. And the Mad Hatter encounters Alice after she's been away from Wonderland, and he says, "You're not the same as you were before. You were much more muchier. You've lost your muchness." And so Natalie goes into talking about how she had lost her muchness. So I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit more about this realization and how you've been refinding your muchness over the last year.
Well, I think a year ago, I was in this place where I was in this relationship. I still had one foot in Canada and one foot in the US. I knew that I was moving, but I was still in the process of that, and it was very stressful. Also, since September 2015, that's when we just experienced this like massive up-leveling at our company, and I signed this book deal with my dream publisher, Penguin Random House, and their Tarcher Perigee imprint, and things were just going so well, and that came with an avalanche of work. And I feel like from September 2015, pretty much until this point, actually, I haven't had a lot of space to breathe. And I feel like a year ago, I was sort of at that point where I had a whole bunch of things to wrap up. I had to finish the move. Like I had to fully be 2 feet on the ground in the US with my companies moved. And that was a really big process. And then there was this relationship I was hanging on to as well. So I feel like there was just a lot of stuff that I had to let go of and a lot that I had to burn away. And I keep mentioning stillness and how important that is. And, what I've done over the last year to sort of reclaim that, to find that muchness, is to just get really quiet. I haven't posted as much on social media. I've guarded my heart a little more, and I really just needed space to unfurl. And I needed space to just get really in touch with what I want next, where I want to go. I needed to break down the barriers that made me feel safe, and I needed to strip myself down to my very essence, because I feel like it's from that place that you can create what's next. And a lot of the goals that I had 5 years ago and goals that I had even 10 years ago, I smashed those goals. And in doing that, I sort of got to this place where it's like, okay, what I'm feeling right now is I've got to the top of this mountain that I worked so hard to climb, and now I just want to like take in the views, and I want to reflect on how that's changed me. And then it's going to be time to head down the mountain and go climb another one, right? But I just needed to burn away so much so that I could rebuild and create what's coming. And I'm still in that process right now, and it feels like a really beautiful place to be. And we're going to be doing a big rebrand, and I feel like, yeah, that thing that the photographer saw was just that letting go of all those layers, and just being my much more muchier me again.
I love it. That's amazing. And I'm curious, what is the decision for moving into the US?
Well, I have so many more opportunities here for what I do. With the growth of our companies, the fact that so much of our business was already in the US, it just made a lot more sense. There are a lot more doors that are open for me here. And Canada's a much smaller market. I love my country so much. I love being Canadian.
It's
I
a
will visit often,
it's a little
but
funny because all the Americans are talking about like abandoning ship here and just like going to
well,
Canada.
so funny story. As I was entering the US after I got my green card and I was going through the final process at the airport to make my official entry as a resident, the immigration officer was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I was like, "Please don't second guess me right now and this decision that I've made. Like it was hard enough." And he's like, "Well, I actually just moved my family to Canada from the US. Like I don't want to be in the United States right now." And I was like, "Well, thanks so much for sharing that story with me." She's like, "I don't know. I think you should really think about this. Are you sure?" And I was like, "Buddy, I'm sure. Like just stamp the fucking thing. Like seriously, like I can't take this anymore. Like stop questioning my decision." So that was my entry into the U.S. Even the U.S. Customs and Immigration agent was telling me that I was making a bad decision.
That's amazing. So where in the
Right.
US are you now?
She's in Santa Monica.
Oh, you're in LA.
I am.
How are you enjoying the beautiful city of angels?
Well, right now, as my East Coast friends are experiencing a fun snowstorm, I'm like sitting here looking out at mountains and blue sky and sunshine and trees, and I'm
It's a
so happy.
pretty good place to be.
Yeah, it's pretty
So
nice.
good. So good.
I was over winter, like, well, pretty much at the age of like 4, but I stuck it out because I had to. And
I
now
get it. I get it. I'm not a winter fan.
yeah, I heard someone said the other day that she believes winter is unnecessary.
Well, it has its point, its place. I was so productive in the winter. I would write a book every winter because I would just curl up in front of my fireplace and not leave the house.
Yep.
And now I've got this beautiful sunshine, so I'm actually like going outside every day and working less. And yeah, it's different for sure. I feel like I've just had to accept less is more for me right now, and I'm loving it. I
I,
really am.
I love it. And we're going to go more into this in the extended cut. But I am curious, you mentioned how you've reached the top of the mountain, you've worked hard, and you've gotten here.
Right.
How
And there's always another mountain to climb,
Oh,
but
totally, totally. But I am
just
curious, like, how did you find, I don't want to use the word balance, but I am, because it's the only word I know in my mind right now. But that balance between life and business, between climbing this mountain and having an ease in your life, like, what did that look like for you?
Marcus Buckingham has this beautiful concept that he calls strategic imbalance. And I feel like that's what I strive for. So, strategic imbalance is all about imbalancing your life in a way that brings you the most joy because we all have a different equilibrium. What feels really good for me would be like the worst life ever for somebody else. Like the amount of time I spend on airplanes and traveling and speaking and working would be somebody else's nightmare. So it's a matter of looking and really examining what brings you joy and imbalancing your life so that you're eliminating things that are causing a lot of stress and doing the things that bring you more joy. So for some of us, especially for entrepreneurs, we often get so much joy out of our work, and for people who love growing and expanding and, we love personal development, we we will spend a lot more time going through pain because we know that pain is often what leads to growth. We know that doing what's uncomfortable leads to growth. So those are things that actually, for me, those kinds of things bring me joy because I know that even when something is deeply uncomfortable or causing me some pain and some short-term discomfort, it's leading me to where I need to be. And so I probably take on more uncertainty than a lot of other people. So it's imbalancing your life in a way that feels best for you. And I feel like that's a way more beautiful concept than balance and trying to be like, okay, I'm going to work for 6 hours a day, and then I need to do this in order to stay balanced, and then I need to be making sure that I'm getting that green juice in, and got to make sure that I'm at yoga. Sometimes we take somebody else's definition of what a balanced life might look like and try to apply it to our own when that doesn't necessarily work for us. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So I think that that's a better way to look at it, because it's so easy to look at somebody else's idea of balance and be like, okay, so I need to do her routine in the morning. I need to do this every day. And you can never just mimic somebody else's life. Like create your own life. I'd say one of the other things that I just had to be comfortable with was around my schedule, like making my schedule work for me, because for the longest time, I wouldn't let myself really take a break during the day. And that was just the stupidest thing. I mean, I felt like because I had a partner who went to a day job, that I should be working every single hour that he was at work. And now I have this day where I usually do 5 hours in the morning. I'll take a couple hours off at lunch for like eating good food, and I really like to cook, and meditating, going for a walk, and spending a bit of time outside. And then I'll go back and do like a part two, which is another 5 hour workday. So I break my day into these two 5 hour blocks because it's what works for me. And for the longest time, I just wouldn't allow myself to take a couple hours during the day to do what I wanted to do, which is just the most ridiculous thing ever. So give yourself permission to structure your days and your time, the time that you get to control. If you don't have to be at a job, if you do have to be at a job, of course, that's part of your day, but give yourself permission to use your time the way that you want to use your time.
Thais and I always talk about, like, why did we go into business for ourselves if we're going to be meaner to us than our bosses in the corporate world were? Like, my bosses were way nicer to me than I'm ever to myself. And so we're big proponents too of, doing like, what do you want your business to look like? It doesn't have to look like anyone else's. What do you want your schedule to look like? Forcing yourself to do something that doesn't feel good, just go get a job again, because it's going to feel way better.
And we're going to continue to talk about this with
Yes.
Natalie in our extended cut, which you can get by joining our Facebook group at www.beamplified.community. Thank you, Natalie, for being with us today. Where can people learn more about you and your amazing work?
Yeah, come on over to shetakesontheworld.com. You can find me there, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Natalie MacNeil, and that's MacNeil. So come say hello, download some of our free goodies, and check out some of our videos. We've got lots to support ambitious women doing big things in the world.
I love it. And that's all going to be in the show notes for those of you who want to learn more about Natalie.
Yes. Thank you, Miss Natalie. We appreciate you. Excited to dive further with you into the extended cut. And for those of you listening, you can always find us on all of the socials at The Amplify Co. And until next week,
Go be amplified. Woo!